Oh, hang on. Good morning, everybody, and thank you ever so much for coming to my workshop today. I wanted to do this workshop for the Guild because I was very, very fortunate to receive a bursary from the Guild for the last part of the research of this book. And so this is my way of saying thank you to the Guild for allowing me to complete my research and for helping me with it. As you can see, my book, Freekeh, Wild Leaf and Ancient Grains, was very, very recently published by Prospect Books. And what I'm going to do today is just give you an introduction into the book, into the wild wheats, the ancient grains, but more importantly, the whole process of Freekeh. And Freekeh is, which I will go into, basically I'm going to take you on a journey through photographs from the land to the plate of how the ancient process of agricultural process of growing Freekeh. I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about myself and my background and how I actually got to writing the books that I have written and my niche writing. I was born into a very large Jewish family that originally came from Liverpool, and food was a very, very large part of my upbringing. My mother was a very good, homely Jewish cook, as was my grandmother and all my aunts from a very large extended family. Also, coupled with my Jewish upbringing, I was quite heavily involved in the love of Israel. And I went to Israel for the first time with a group of like-minded teenagers at the age of 16. We toured the country and I absolutely loved it. I loved the food, I loved the climate, I loved everything about the history, the culture. And I decided that after my A-levels, I was going to go back, I was going to take a year out and I was going to go and live on a kibbutz for a year. That I did, and I loved it so much that I decided, even having a place as a nurse at UCH in London to do my nurse training, I wasn't ready for it. I was a young woman. I felt that nursing wasn't quite right for me at that time. So I went back to Israel, to the kibbutz that I'd been on, and I lived there for nearly 2 years. And my main job while I was out there was working in the kitchens. I used to, in those days, the kibbutz were big communities with a very socialist belief. And so everyone did everything together, including eating their 3 meals a day. So working in the kitchens basically meant that you were menu planning, you were cooking, you were ordering all the ingredients, and you were working in order to put 3 meals a day in these sort of huge dining rooms for 500-600 people. And I absolutely loved it. And I think that was my first realization that I had to do something with food in my life, which was a little bit of a problem because I'd always wanted to be a nurse too. So the two didn't initially combine. And I decided for lots of reasons to end up going back to England and training to be a nurse. I did about 15 years in the health service and worked my way up to management, deciding that I really had enough and I wanted to go back into my first love, which was food. I retrained at a Leeds School of Food and Wine and opened up an outside catering company. And I took all my Middle Eastern influences into my catering. So I produced that, I did lots of parties. I did lots of, I had lots of friends and family who wanted to, parties, but they wanted the food of that I knew about. So I knew about the religious dietary laws, what you could have, what you couldn't have. I wasn't a kosher caterer, but I was very influenced by, making sure that I didn't serve the things that obviously you weren't supposed to have. And I put in a very fresh Middle Eastern, Mediterranean flavour to my food. Unfortunately, I had to give up my catering company through ill health in about 2013, and I took to food writing. I retrained again on an online food journalism course with the College of Media and Publication, and basically got a food journalism diploma, and decided that this was what I was going to be able to do. I used to go back and forth to Israel, and I was very, very lucky that my first book, The Galilean Kitchen, fell onto my plate. And I went into the homes of Arabic women and cooked with them, taking their recipes from their mothers and their grandmothers and various generations before them, and took them and turned them into a recipe book. But equally, there were so many different and new ingredients for me that I sort of started to investigate then in the narrative as well. Doing supper clubs and promoting the book, which I self-published because that was my only way into it at that time. I was lucky enough to meet Catherine Kilgareth from Prospect Books, and from there, Freekeh, Wild Wheat and Ancient Grains was born. And what the idea was very much to merge the old with the new, to look at the ancient grains and the wild wheats of the Middle East, and to look at how they create these contemporary healthy recipes for today. So that's my background, and I'm now going to sort of go through a little bit about the actual wild wheats, the grains, and get onto the Freekeh. So what's happening here? What we're going to really do is explore the origins of the healthiest wheats and grains from our forgotten heritage as man's core staples, combine the ancient culinary history and archaic.
Just move the screen. No, that's what happens when you've got.
Ruth, could you run the presentation so we get the slides on full screen?
Yeah.
I'm out.
How am I doing it? What?
I don't personally use PowerPoint, but there should be like a play button or something.
You go up to slideshow. Sorry for interrupting. If you go up to slideshow at the very top of the screen,
yeah,
very, very top, it's about 5 or 6 along in the orange.
Oh yeah, I see. Yeah.
Right. Unfortunately, I've got this back button. Oh.
Yeah, it's just along from home.
Yeah.
I can see it.
Keep going. Keep going.
Design, translate.
Slideshow. Keep going.
Yeah, unfortunately, I've got this black, the black screen sharing thing at the top, and I can't get rid of it.
No, it's fine. You should still be able to control, because you're sharing you're sharing your screen. You should be able. We can't do it for you, but you should be able to play your slideshow. If you click on I can see it on the top of on top of your screen. It says slideshow. No, and the orange bar at the top.
Yeah, I can't. Unfortunately, I don't know how to get. Hang on, I don't know how. Right. Sorry, done it. Okay, yeah. Slideshow.
You should be able to play it from current slide. It should be fine if you that's it.
Current slide. Okay. Done it.
That's perfect, Ruth.
Thank you. I'm sorry, everybody.
Don't apologise. It's fine.
I much prefer to talk to people in person, but I unfortunately can't do it at the moment, so I hope this is okay. Can you hear me? Is everything all right?
Not really, no. The sound is awful.
You can't hear me?
I can't even get off the actual thing.
Sam?
Sorry, I was on mute. I can hear you.
Somebody's saying they can't.
Well, I can personally. I mean, it is a bit muffled, but that's, I think, unfortunately, that I'm not sure unless you've got a separate microphone, there's much you'll be able to do about that, unless you can.
Right, I'll talk a bit nearer. Is that any better?
How's that for everyone else? It's better somebody else.
Somebody is saying that they can't. I overheard somebody saying that the sound is awful.
Yeah. Well, I'd say it's fine for me, but I don't know. So Jane Milton is saying she's hearing fine too. Carry on, Ruth, and we'll see how we go. But yeah, if you can bring your laptop or whatever device you're using as close as possible.
As possible as I can. So hopefully, and I'll try and be as loud as I can.
Yeah.
Anyway, so what we're going to do is explore the origins of the healthy fruits and grains of our forgotten heritage, combine the ancient culinary history and archaic agricultural traditions with the biblical links to Freekeh, and look at its place within the Arabic and Israeli cuisine, and examine how the wild roots and ancient grains have re-emerged into modern staples with innovative ways to cook and bake that connect to our past. So, the dawn of agriculture took place during the Neolithic era in the Fertile Crescent between 10,000 and 3000 BCE, marking the transition from hunter-gathering to crop husbandry. Black charred fragments of the wild emmer and barley were discovered at excavation sites within the Levant and are found to be staples of the Nutritious communities, who were considered to be the first people to cultivate cereal plants for edible use, and this formed a staple of the past eras. These particular charred fragments that you can see on the screen were found to be wild emmer seeds that were carbon dated back to pre-domestication from an excavation that was done in Israel in 1989 by some archaeologists at the Haifa University. And this excavation took place in a place called Ahallo, which is on the edge of the Sea of Galilee. It was actually found literally by chance by somebody who was swimming in the Sea of Galilee, and he dived down doing a bit of snorkeling and looking to see what he could see, and he found this excavation. So, but they had to wait for the Sea of Galilee to actually be reduced, because obviously the water level needed to go down, and they took about, I think it was 3 different excavations, and they actually found these black charred seeds, which they discovered had gone back to the Nutritious community. It was during the period of the first temple of Jerusalem that the harvest was threatened, and the threatened floor destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar of Babylonia and the rise of his authoritarian rule. Only small amounts of grains were ever protected for the weekly religious sacrifices, and these were known as the showbreads, and they were offered up to God as a symbol for an abundance, which has stayed. It was not until the building of the second temple in 515 BCE, when the biblical writings emerged together with the belief that the land of Israel lay within a flourishing belt of wheat, barley, and many other cereal crops. In Genesis, the first book of the Old Testament, wheat and barley are mentioned as the 2 most important agricultural crops and the core staples that sustain life. And that was actually, it is written in Deuteronomy, right at the very beginning of the Old Testament: a land with wheat and barley, vines and fig leaves, pomegranates, olive oil and honey, a land where bread will not be scarce and you will lack nothing. Bread has been a staple food across all cultures and cuisines since the beginning of time. Isabella Beeton in 1861 was clear on her explanation of bread as an article of necessity, for it constitutes of itself a complete life sustainer. Merging old traditions, biblical writings, and ancient cultural processes with innovative baking techniques are leading to many strains of ancient wheats being baked into artisan loaves and sourdough breads by bakers and chefs around the world, connecting the lost crops of our ancient past into modern eating. This particular picture shows the many strains of ancient wheats, and it was a very interesting picture because all those wheats are very, very old ancient strains, and the bread that was made was actually made by an artisan 5th generation baker that I baked with in Israel. And he's an ancient grain sourdough baker whose father arrived in Palestine in 1870 as a Polish immigrant, only knowing how to bake bread and bagels from rye flour. His father initially sold his bread on the streets of Jaffa until he had enough money to open his first bakery in the centre of Israel, which was Palestine then, and remains in the family today. And all the sourdough breads that he makes from various different ancient strains of wheat are sold in Tel Aviv in restaurants today. The wild wheat is classified as the genus Tritum, of which there are 4 wild species categorized into hulled and free threshing. The ancient Hebrew name for wheat is pitah, and it's stated, as I said, in the Old Testament as the staple given to the Israelites to sustain them throughout the wilderness, and it's still grown all the different wheats abundantly in Israel today. The earliest beginnings of wheat trace back to the Neolithic era within the Fertile Crescent, and ancient staples of the hunter-gathering communities have remnants of the wild emmer and barley and grasses that are still found across various agricultural sites, archaeological sites across the Levant. They can be found in Jericho, in Tagadag, in Turkey, in Egypt, and we're still seeing them today. And they're remnants of how they were used in the hunter-gathering communities, and they were stone ground with the different mills, original mills, and made into some sort of bread to eat. Wild wheat thrives in temperatures in a temperate climate and by natural flowing waters, which is why it was yields so well in the Middle East. Wild wheat has a very brittle spikelet and holding no more than 2 to 3 grains per spikelet. They have toughened gleaned and practised easily in hot air, dry winds of the Middle East, in comparison to the domesticated wheats that have soft, fragile gleans and can be easily threshed. In 1906, Aaron Aronson, a Romanian agronomist, discovered wild emmer in the foothills of Mount Hermon in northern Israel, and this was proclaimed to be the species of the mother of wheat. And then further, a little bit later on in 1913, August Schultz, a German botanist, classified the wild wheat into 3 natural species: emmer, einkorn, and dinkel, which we commonly know as spelt. Today, plant geneticist Dr. Asaf Distelfeld, who actually spoke at the Oxford Food Symposium in 2018 with a presentation called The Wild Side of Wheat, leads the research on nutritional content of wild emmer, stating it contains more proteins and minerals with a low gluten structure than its domestic counterpart. Unfortunately, its yield remains so poor because of the 2 to 3 grains per spikelet, so it's not widely available. Ancient grains have been classified and defined by the Old Roads Whole Grain Council in the USA as containing bran, germ, and endosperm present in the same proportions as at the harvest. They've re-emerged into modern diets from unchanged agricultural customs and practices from the Neolithic era, and making their comeback today as superfoods. Ancient grains were revered foods of worship, sustenance to the Israelites during their wandering through the wilderness, and rations for soldiers and sailors during the legendary sea battles and sea crusades and land battles. The ancient grains thrive in poor quality soils, colder, wetter climates, and require less irrigation. And as a direct result, they have been a powerful tool in staving off famine and hunger in poverty-stricken countries. And this led to the Green Revolution in the 1800s. It was headed by Norman Borlaug, the Nobel Peace Prize winner, and for its reforms in the milling and production of grain through the very hungry world. High nutritional content with the added proteins, vitamins, and minerals outweigh the modern cereals known as the good carb, and they are known to aid digestion, prevent bloating, and promote good gut health from the much reduced gluten content. Freekeh, for example, Freekeh, which is picked as an immature, unripe wheat, has an underdeveloped gluten structure and therefore prevents the bloating and aids the digestion. The versatile grains making revival into our modern diet include barley, rye, sorghum, and teff, of which sorghum and teff are both grasses and actually completely gluten-free. The lost crops of the wild roots and ancient grains have re-emerged as essential store cover staples in modern cooking and baking, and used in all corners of the globe by chefs, bakers, and home cooks. And they can be made into breads, biscuits, cakes, soups, salads, risottos, stews, granolas, porridge, and so much more, and has become the staple of our diet. I want to take you on a journey now from the land to the plate with Freekeh. Freekeh is not an ancient grain, it's an archaic cultural process producing the modern staple. It's from the Book of Ruth that we first learn about the green tinged parched grain, known in ancient Hebrew as kernel and as the unripe kernels of Freekeh. And a lot of work has been done in a biblical nature reserve in the Judean hills of Jerusalem called cuisine, where they're looking at all the different ancient grains and bringing back biblical cuisine. The immature wheat was reaped, threshed and winnowed in Boaz's fields in Bethlehem. Remnants gleaned after the harvest were roasted on open fires and eaten by the workers to maintain their energy levels. This became known as kali and the biblical fast food snack, and can be still cooked today by just toasting wheat grains on an open fire on barbecue, and then put some sort of salt or some flavouring or spice over the top of it to make it a really healthy, nutritious snack. Due to our economic stages of the cycle of wheat, the annual agricultural practice of harvesting the young wheat goes back through the generations of farmers to protect the kernels from the destruction, which was either disrupted by the hot winds of the Middle East, the swarms of insects that the heat brought with them, or the fires that swept across the lands, usually due to piracy. Around 1000 BC, it was given the name Freekeh or Freekeh, spelled F-R-I.K-A or F-R-E-E-K-A-H, which was derived from the Arabic word to rub, and was an appropriate name given by the process that was vigorously rubbed the blackened husk to expose the green wheat. And this was a very, very popular ingredient at the tables of the Islamic caliphs. So this is the process of how Freekeh starts off and comes actually onto our plate as a grain. So I'm just turning on the. This is the first picture is the picture of the Suckling Valley. The Suckling Valley is in rural Upper Galilee in northern Israel, and it's laden with wheat fields. In the springtime, which is when the wheat is harvested, before the main crop is fully ripe, we see swathes of green immature wheat ears that laden the land. It's a process that's done, usually starts round about early April, once the main rains have finished in the Middle East, and it's the start of the spring. So the weather is very, very, it changes quite a lot. It's quite changeable at the moment at that particular time. And so, but it's a good time to start harvesting the Freekeh. The young Arabic farmers start off the harvest. It's very much a family affair. All the different generations get involved in it, but it's the young men that usually start the harvest by cutting the ears, because it's used with this mangle, or what they also call a hashishi sickle, and it's quite a heavy, old-fashioned implement, and so it's usually done by Australian younger farmers. It's colloquially called the hashishi because it's the implement for cutting the smoking grass, which obviously is what happens to the wheat once it's cut. The sacks are full of are cut, and then they're laid in the field for a few hours, depending on the weather. If we're into the warm sunshine of the spring already, they will just be left for a couple of hours, just to dry out and to just get off the morning dew. And that's before they end up being smoked. They get smoked on what's called a balan, and a balan is an ancient biblical method that is still practiced. The wheat is tossed onto the open fire from the and which is made from a Middle Eastern perennial called the wild thorny burnet, which is found all throughout the Middle East. And it produces less ash while it's alight and very quick to die down, preserving the grain while smoking. The culinary historians of the biblical cuisine believe this method was used to kill the insects and the insect eggs on the wheat, and in keeping with the strict dietary laws of the Israelites. Charcoal wood and cardboard is just as effective and sometimes used, but it very much depends on the farming methods of the family and the generations before them. The annual Freekeh harvesting, as I said, is very much a family affair. So each generation has their own task within the process, and the soaking of wheat is often left to the older women who stand and poke and prod the ears of wheat until charred and giving them the maximum flavour. They're then tossed onto black hessian liners and placed on the ground, and once the wheat is black and charred, they're moved onto a wire mesh away from the fire and onto these liners where they're covered by a very fine netting and left for up to a week, depending on the weather, to completely dry out. Now, centuries ago, the wheat was vigorously rubbed by hand through large ancient sieves, and these sieves went from a really, really coarse sieve to a really fine sieve, and it was usually tasked to the women who sat there rigorously rubbing day in, day out, until they successfully removed all the ash and chaff from the kernels, which usually took hours and hours of labour. The modern method is slightly different and is now based on this modernised contraption, and it really is a contraption. I think that's the only word for it. It's custom built sieving machine, and it's attached to a tractor. The parched wheat is tossed onto the machine and steadily moved along, removing the blackened husk as it goes, and then the wheat is steered down through a cleaning shaft into a chute, and it's collected into this large stack. It's dusty, it's dirty, it's a really, really messy process, messy process. But it requires the farmhands to wear protective clothing and riders to prevent damage to their eyes. And that's how it ends up coming out. So those are the charred husks. There we can still see the green husks, but they're sort of, you can see the black on the person's hand. And that comes from all the chaff in the ash. Once they're sieved, they become kernels, like gritty kernels, but you can still see the remnants of the chaff, and that's still produced in the bags that you can get out there today. And then once it's produced, it just becomes this green tinged kernel. And of course, as I said, it's very versatile. There are soups, there are traditional dishes of Freekeh, and this is a particularly traditional dish, an Arabic dish that's been passed down through the generations for a number of years. And that's a contemporary salad that's on a menu in a very smart television restaurant. Right, I need to stop there and go back.
Thank you, Ruth. If anyone else has questions, please post them in the chat. I've got a couple already that have come through, Ruth, before you start with showing us how to prepare Freekeh. Is it always gathered by hand, or is it now, has that been mechanized in recent times?
No, it is always gathered by hand. The contraption for sieving it has become sort of commercialised and motorised, but the actual process of cutting it is done by hand by the young Arab farmers, and it goes through for the first sort of week or two of the harvest, and that's all they do, and that's why it's such a sort of heavy laboured technique.
Okay. Elizabeth Luard wanted to know whether the charring is a way to prevent sprouting.
No, it's not, because the whole point is that it's cut young and unripe, and it's literally just a process to smoke it. Because that's what Freekeh is. It's smoked. It's not to do with the sprouting or the development of the wheat. It's done for the process of smoking it to get that flavour.
Okay, Birgitta, Do you want to explain what you were saying about brands? Do you want to explain? I think you say you can get fake varieties.
Yes, my question to you, thank you, Ruth, and you've been so brave. The sound was a bit muffled, but it's such an interesting topic. Thank you for doing this. I've ordered your book, so I can't wait to read it. Anyway, my question to you is, so I cook a lot with Freekeh, actually. How do you make sure that you get a quality that is really good? Because unfortunately, I have also encountered that I bought a fake variety, grain that was tinted green. So have you ever come across that?
I haven't come across a fake variety, I have to admit.
I spoke with a Lebanese girlfriend of mine who's really an expert on Freekeh too. We had a session in Kitchen Lab with it, and she said to me, yes, do watch out for some of these brands. But I'm just wondering, depending on how many here today are cooking with Freekeh or have tried to cook with Freekeh, what would you suggest to all of us? Which brands would you?
Well, personally, I mean, I cheat. I admit I cheat. I bring mine back from Israel, and this is from Arab villages that have just produced it, and it's real quality stuff. Now in England, and obviously because it's becoming more and more common, people are looking to see where they can buy it. I have to admit, I have never found it in a proper supermarket, other than, and I don't know if this is sort of really fake or not, is the merchant gourmet brands, because what they are is they're already pre-cooked, which don't have a really smoky flavour, and all you do is put them in the microwave for a minute and you get Freekeh. And you can add obviously your own flavourings to them, but it hasn't got the same smell or taste as the real stuff. Now, but what you can do is you can find it in the continental shops, and it's just literally young Freekeh wheat. I mean, that's all it is. It's wheat, but it's because it's unripe and because it's immature, they put it as young wheat. And it has got the real smoky flavour, it's authentic, and you can get it there. Whole food shops tend to now go into it, but again, on the sort of not so real side, Holland and Barrett, which is where a lot of people will go automatically go and get it, theirs is very, it's very clean. I think that's the expression I want to use. It doesn't seem like it's real in the sense that they call it Freekeh, but it hasn't got that smell. And unfortunately, this is what I don't like about doing these workshops on Zoom, is that you can't smell what I can smell. And I've got
you can describe it, you can describe it. And I think that's really the important thing. People need to put their noses into the stuff.
Yes, they do. They need to be able to smell this sort of real smoky flavour that is coming up from, you can almost smell that fire, that ash that's sort of sitting on the top of it. And what's really interesting is that, as you can, I don't know if you can even see this, you probably can't, I don't want to tip it up too much, but basically you have to soak Freekeh, and I will go through the process of what you have to do, but you have to soak it. And on my bowl, having soaked the real stuff, there is a layer of scum, and it's a layer of black scum that you don't want in your cooking. So you then have to rinse it. And all the recipes state very clearly with the real stuff that you must soak it and you must drain it and then rinse it. And that's the problem with the fake stuff, or the stuff that they've already cleaned before they produce. They're washing away all this sort of the flavour and the smell and everything that you get that you should be getting with properly produced, harvested Freekeh. So that's my answer. But actually making something green, I must admit I haven't come across it. The other thing that obviously is really, again, if you can't get it in your shop, you can always get everything on the internet. And Zaytoon is a Palestinian social enterprise company, and they bring back Lebanese and Palestinian Freekeh, and they sell it online. And I would always go to an authentic buyer to get the Freekeh.
And also, I guess, look for little bits of stone or anything that might, It's a live ingredient, so.
Yeah, I mean, that's another thing is if you look at these packets, these are just the continental packets. It's just Freekeh wheat. So, and you can see through it that it is slightly dark and some of the kernels. I mean, this authentic packet, which is, as I say, this came from an Arab village in northern Israel very recently. You can see it's all very different colours. So you've got some very lighter kernels, you've got some darker kernels, you've got some more black kernels. And I think that shows that they've literally just put it through the contraption, sift them all, and chuck them in a bag. I mean, they do have to go through a milling process, but it's a very, very coarse milling process, and it's a very basic milling process. It just literally, it doesn't clean it, it doesn't do anything, it just cracks the kernels so that they're slightly smaller than how they're harvested.
Thank you.
Jan is asking about the brands in the UK. She says most of the brands in the UK are cracked. Is this standard?
Yes, there are two types of Freekeh. Well, there's two, not types, that's the wrong word. There are two sort of, the kernels can be cracked in two different ways. So there's the coarsely cracked kernel, which is what the main Freekeh that I use and has got for salads and for risottos and things like that. But what they also do is they grind it, they mill it finely, and that's the Freekeh that they use for things like soups. So and it's got much more of a texture of bulgur wheat or couscous. It's a much more finely cracked Freekeh wheat. And then of course, what doesn't come very easily, and I actually have never found commercialised in England, is Freekeh flour. And Freekeh flour, I don't know if you can see it, but it's literally just this sort of fine powder, which I grind myself in a coffee grinder or a spice grinder, and that turn it into pastry. And actually there's some recipes in the book for pastry, and it really is lovely because if you pair it with fruits and as an apple tart recipe, you really just get that slightly nutty, smoky flavour to your pastry that complements your flavoured fruits well as well. But as I say, it's a very simple process to grind it, and it comes out as perfectly good fine flour.
Thank you. Oh, another question. Do you cook it like rice, i.e. rinsing it first, then adding salt to the boiling water?
Yeah.
Oh, hang on, I've lost it. And what proportion of water to the grains? So you're going to cover this, aren't you?
No, I was going to cover it, but I can easily cover it now. It's
okay.
Not a problem.
That's from Susan.
Right.
Susan, is that, and then she finishes with, is it considered to be healthier than other grains?
Yes. It's healthier than other wheats, and because of its immaturity. So it's the do soak, rinse, and re-dry before grinding the flour. No. Let me go back to. I'll go back to that question in a minute. It's healthier because it's immature. So the main thing is that the gluten structure hasn't fully developed. And that's why it's a healthier wheat, and it aids digestion and it prevents the bloating. And all the ancient grains, because of their harvesting and their growing, they have good, higher protein and mineral content as well. So yes, it is healthier. Can I go back to the flour question?
Yeah, of course. There was Linda's asking, do you soak, rinse, and re-dry before grinding to a flour?
No, you don't. You actually just grind it from the packet as Freekeh. The trouble is, if you rinse it and dry it, it just becomes very moist and it's very difficult to grind it. So you grind it as the kernels that come out. And by the time you ground it, I've never had any problem with the odd bit of ash or chaff if there is still in it. Actually causing any problems once you've made the pastry. So no, you must grind it as kernels, as whole kernels dry.
And what about the Susan Volk's question about cooking it like rice?
Right. Are there anything else, and I'll then go through the whole cooking process?
I don't think there's lots of comments about how lovely it is and highly aromatic, great in stuffing. So I think, oh yeah, I love the idea of smoky short crust. I think we're fine to carry on with it. You showing us how to cook it. That would be perfect.
Okay. So
do feel free, everyone, to put questions. Continue with the questions, and we'll come back to them later.
So when you've got the process of cooking it is quite similar to rice in a way, actually. You start off with your kernels, as I said, and then you must soak them. So soak them for 5-10 minutes in cold water, unless you're doing a salad. Now, there are some salads that they do in the Arabic cuisine. This is very much like bulgur and or couscous. So if you're going to use it in that kind of way, you then soak it for about 10 minutes in boiling water. And that way, as it's boiling, as the water is really hot,
sorry, just ignore that.
It's now coming out. It wasn't coming out when I was doing presentation, so I'm looking at the chat as well. Sorry, excuse me, everybody. So when if you're using it as a like bulgur, like couscous, then as I say, you just soak it in boiling water, and you literally just put your Freekeh in a bowl and just cover it so that it's, you know, half an inch above the kernels with freshly boiled water. And then it softens as the water's being absorbed. So although it won't absorb all the water, and you do have to drain it and squeeze it, you can then use it as on top of vegetables or salad ingredients, with dressings, and when you eat it, it's soft enough to be able to just have that nutty bite. So that's one way of cooking it. The other main way of cooking it for risottos, for pilaf, for you know, just to have as an accompaniment as a carbohydrate, is to do it the way as you would rice. So you've got your kernels, you soak them in cold water just for 5-10 minutes. And you're only soaking them on this occasion, as I said, to get rid of the dirt and the grit and anything that's still within the kernels. You then rinse them, drain them and rinse them, and then you put them in a very, you know, just a normal pan. This is the basic way. Obviously, if you want to add flavourings, I'll go through that afterwards. But the very, very basic way is you put them in a pan, you then cover it with either boiling water or a stock. And we go back to the old way of using Freekeh in the previous centuries. And the whole point about the Freekeh was that it was cooked in this broth or this stock that was kept for, you know, that was boiling and used for days. And it was the broth that also helped to make this flavoursome carbohydrate and dish. Nowadays, obviously, people use different stock cubes, which, you know, I would always use a good quality one if you're using it. All my recipes in the book are vegetarian. So to be quite honest, you're just able to use water and put your flavourings into the Freekeh once it's cooked. And I think that's the difference now, is that, you know, if you want to put a good chicken stock and you're making a good chicken dish or a chicken risotto, whatever, then that's fine. But if you're just cooking it and you want to add your own dressings, your own vegetables, your own ideas, then it's just as easy to cook it with boiling water. And what you do is you bring it up to the boil, and then you reduce it so that it actually just simmers away for no more than 15-20 minutes. And don't put a lid on it. Don't be tempted to put a lid on it. And you want to leave it so that basically, I've left it so it's just a little bit. You want it so that the water is completely absorbed. And then, and that's how it's softened. So I'm going to heat it up just for a little bit longer until all the water gets absorbed. And then turn off your heat. put on a lid and leave it for 10 minutes. And that way, the freekeh is still steaming and it's still taking on, absorbing the final bits of the water, and it softens the grain, but you will still find there is a very, very small, slight bite to it, which is what you want. If you boil it too rigorously, you will find that it becomes a soft mush, and that's not really very pleasant for anybody. So you want it so that it's very, very similar to cooking rice. And obviously, if you depending on your recipe, depending on your dish, your flavourings, your whatever you want, you can either add in bay leaves and or cloves or whatever to the actual water, so that just takes on a little bit of extra flavour as well. Or quite often, what they do when they're cooking the sort of the traditional pilaf in the Arabic cuisine is they start off by frying off some onions. So you fry up a bit of onion in some good flavoured extra virgin olive oil. And always when you're using freekeh and you're trying to get as much flavour into it, make sure that you always use extra virgin olive oil. And a tip that I was given by the Arabic women that I cooked with my first book was always cook with cold olive oil. So you put your olive oil in the pan, you then put in your onions, shallot, whatever you're using, and then heat it up together, and that way it takes on the flavour of the oil as well as the vegetables. And then once they're softened, you throw in your freekeh. So again, it takes on that little bit of extra flavour, together with any spices that you want. Traditional Middle Eastern spices that work brilliantly with freekeh is baharat. And baharat is the equivalent of their allspice, I think is probably the best way of describing it. It's a combination of marjoram, cinnamon, cloves, basil buds, all these sort of things that's ground down together. So it's a equivalent of a 5, 6, 7 spice mix with very warming, fragrant spices that works brilliantly with savoury food. And that is lovely with freekeh. And then again, you just cover it with water, let it all soak in, let it all. My mother had a wonderful word, it's a Jewish word, and it's called capradel. And if you let it all capradel, it sort of all takes in all the flavours, and it's a lovely old Yiddish word, and it really does make the food have this lovely, lovely flavour. And then once it's steamed and once it's cooked, it ends up just sort of like a bowl of, well, it's soft, lovely, light rice, but it's immature wheat, and then it's always finished off with something like pine nuts or almond slivers, and that is actually your traditional freekeh, Arabic freekeh, that this recipe can go down from generations to generations. Just trying to get this to simmer so that it takes away all that you can see it. So that's how you cook freekeh basically. Now other things that you can do with it is make bread, and this is a recipe that was devised by Erez Komarovsky. Now Erez Komarovsky was an artisan pioneer baker within the Middle East, an Israeli gentleman. And he wrote a book called the Baking Book. Now, unfortunately, it is only currently still available in Hebrew. But he gave me this recipe for my book, and it's a freekeh bread. It's not actually bizarrely made with freekeh flour. It's made with wholemeal flour and strong white flour, as you would, but it's got softened freekeh kernels within it. So if I have to open for you. You probably can't see because of the camera, but it's actually got whole kernels within the bread. And it's a lovely soft dough with this nutty bite of freekeh within the bread. And it really is, it's a lovely recipe. It's a very easy recipe. You put a lot, the dough, you make the dough and prove it once. And then the best time to make it is late in the afternoon and let it prove again overnight just leave it in the fridge overnight, bring it out, bring it up to room temperature to cool once more, and bake it. And it really is a really interesting bread. Very nice, very soft, lovely with a good hunk of cheese and a glass of cold white wine. My favourite. So it's very versatile, basically.
Has anyone got any questions they would like to ask? Jan's got one actually regarding the ratio of water to grain. She's heard that it's 3 to 1. Is that roughly right? Right for Freekeh?
It is roughly right, and if you're being very accurate, yes, I would say 3 to 1. And that you'll find that that's probably the right ratio in most of the recipes. To be quite honest, I don't think you have to be that accurate with it. And as long as it's completely submerged, you must make sure that it's completely submerged with whatever liquid you're doing. And I would go so far as to say about an inch above the level of the kernels. But yes, if you're going to be accurate, and I'd say 3 to 1.
And if you wanted to add stock to the recipes in your book, would you be okay to use something like the Marigold Swiss vegetable bouillon powder?
Yes, you could. Yeah, anything like that will do. I personally use stock pots. I just think they're easy, and they usually work out to be the right amount, and they're an okay flavour. But as I say, I don't think you desperately need to use stock. The other thing that works very well if you're not a vegetarian is using chicken soup powder. And that has that you would do in a Telma do it, and a lot of obviously good cooks use it for their chicken soups. And you can just get it as a very yellow powder. If you put a tablespoon of that into the water, again, that gives it quite a nice sort of flavour. Although it is a little bit salty sometimes, so be careful with the seasoning. But it takes on lots of flavour. It's very good with dressings, but particularly sort of Middle Eastern dressings with tahina, preserved lemons work really well. You can do lots of Mediterranean flavours. It just takes on lots of flavour. And it's a great accompaniment to they don't even need to any protein, and one of the nicest recipes that I think is in the book, and I really love, is the Freekeh risotto, and that's just a lot of vegetables sweated down with a bit of white wine as well, and it really is cooked like a normal risotto, and then just finished off in the oven. And it's a real meal in itself and absolutely delightful. I'm
making the Freekeh and roasted cauliflower salad tonight with the
That's a good one. That's a good one. And the one with the heritage carrots is also very nice. This has got, it's very with date syrup and dates and carrots and Freekeh. They all really pair well together. There's sort of nice sweetness to it all, and that's a lovely salad as well. But do try a few of the sweet ones. There's a carrot cake, I think it's a carrot cake in it that uses Freekeh flour. And again, the spicing, the warm spicing, the cinnamon, the cloves, mixed spice, they just work really well with the smoky flavour of the flour. Birgitta rather wants to know, have you made kibbeh with Freekeh? I haven't personally, but you can. But you need, again, if you are going to make kibbeh with it, you need to use the fine ground. You need to slightly finer kernels. So I wouldn't make it down to a flour status. But if you put it in a grinder and just crack them a little bit more, you'll find that you've got a better consistency. Because otherwise it's just a little bit chunky. And again, you want to use it like you would, or you could use it like you would bulgur, as in soak it in boiling water for 10-15 minutes first, and then drain it, squeeze out all the water. And as long as they're slightly soft, then you can put them with to make the kibbeh. Put them with the meat to make the kibbeh. But don't do it just as raw grains, as whole as these ones, because you will find that it's sort of sticks out a little bit and isn't as palatable as it could be.
Has anyone got any other questions? I've got a question. Now, there are many recipes in the book that are from ancient sources. I know we discussed, that's what sort of, I'm sorry, I have to interrupt your flow. That's we were discussing the other day the Egyptians. There's a classic Egyptian dish, isn't there, which in fact isn't vegetarian, so it isn't in Ruth's book, but it's for pigeons stuffed with Freekeh. And you were saying some interesting things about pigeons or pigeons.
Yes. So basically there are a number of old Freekeh recipes. There's one by Philippa Boaz, and she used it, and it's an old Syrian recipe, and it's called the mould of bulgur. But actually, the mould of bulgur, but actually it was Freekeh that they used. And again, the old traditional recipes were very, very simply just the Freekeh cooked in these lovely, flavoursome, rich broths, and then they were used to stuff various game birds that they had. But I was telling Sam that in Egypt, the pigeons or swabs were very, very highly sought after, and they used to home pigeons and keep them in these conical towers. But they were apparently, the swabs were thought to be very conducive to sort of love and very useful for a tool for them people. So they used to serve them at marriage weddings. And they used to stuff the birds with Freekeh and serve them as the wedding meal as a special delicacy for the Egyptians. But I don't know. You can stuff normal pigeons now with them, and they were just flavoured with lots of with a good flavoured broth and spices, and that was it really. It was very, very simple, but they used to do that quite a lot.
Would the stuffing work with turkey, given the time of year we're approaching?
With turkey, absolutely perfectly. I probably put an onion in, and probably put a couple of chestnuts in, and make it your own Christmas stuffing with Freekeh.
Susan again is asking where you can buy it in Israel. I'm assuming you say it, you're meaning Freekeh or the book, Susan?
So can you buy Freekeh?
I'm assuming we're talking Freekeh.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. Yes, sorry.
Yes. I have a sister in Israel who I'm hoping to visit at some point. So I'm hoping to go, and obviously I love going to the markets, indoor markets in Israel, which occurred to me that possibly you could buy it there, but Ruth may have another suggestion.
It depends on which market you're talking about. Where is it?
Yeah, it's goodness, it's a while since I've been there. It's
is it in Tel Aviv?
No, in Jerusalem. Sorry.
Oh, Machane Yehuda.
Yes, that's right.
Machane Yehuda, you probably can get it. I haven't been there for quite a number of years, but I'm sure you can get it in Machane Yehuda. But to be honest, you can get it in most supermarkets there. Or any shops. There's lots of local shops, and you just walk in and you'll get, just like you'll get all different grains, all different pulses, you'll find Freekeh. You sometimes don't find it at this time of year, or well, I know this time of year is probably still all right, but come sort of January, February, you find that the production is a little bit low. And that's mainly because obviously it's coming up to the spring when it's actually starting again. The harvest is starting again. But if you really want authentic, to be honest, just go into any sort of little Arabic shop and you will find it. There are lots of different villages around, particularly within, near Jerusalem, and you will find just bags of Freekeh. So I think you'll probably find you'll get it more readily in Israel than you will in England.
Fantastic, that's really helpful. Thank you.
Has anyone got any other questions? related to Freekeh or other ancient grains. It doesn't have to be just Freekeh. There's many ancient grains covered in your book, aren't there, Ruth?
There are. There's barley, there's rye, there's teff, there's sorghum, there's obviously spelt and einkorn and emmer as the wheats. And there are recipes, there are sort of traditional recipes for most of them, and they're all coupled with contemporary recipes for the different grains.
And I have to ask, did you have any dealings with Laura in terms of the Instagram challenge this month? Because I know when it was sorghum the other day, and
no, I had nothing to do. I was quite surprised on day 3 when I got sorghum, and then I got wheat the other day as well.
Yeah.
So, but she has put in a few curveballs with things that I have absolutely no clue about, like bento and various other things. So I don't think it was just put it for my benefit.
No, I'm sure it was just coincidence, but it did make me smile.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't think I had your book at the point that the sorghum came off.
No, but the sorghum pecan pie is really worth a try if anyone's doing a Thanksgiving meal tomorrow, or Friday. That really is a very good recipe, I have to say. And sorghum flour again, teff flour, even karasan, rye, emmer and einkorn I find a little bit harder to get hold of. But most whole food shops will supply them for you. But most of the major supermarkets now sell all these different flours. So they really are much easier to come by than they were. I have to say. But can I just, one of the things I just wanted to say was that I was really lucky with the book. To have Judy Rose write my foreword. Now, Judy, most of you know, is the daughter of Evelyn Rose, and Evelyn Rose is the legendary Jewish cookery writer of all times. There is not many Jewish women who don't have an Evelyn Rose cookbook on their shelves, and it was just lovely because she wrote about the foreword and brought her mother into it, and how her mother, who lived in America, championed what she called the biblical grains way back, sort of many years ago. So they have been used over the years, and it's so lovely that they're really making a comeback now into our diets. So do have a go, do use them, because they're healthier, they're better for you, and and they're really tasty.
Can you use, if you've got, say you've bought one of the specialist flours, can you substitute that in like a regular cake recipe?
Yes, except I tend to feel that it needs a little bit more of an added raising agent. And some of them don't rise quite as well. So if it said, normally you just put a teaspoon in of baking powder or bicarb or whatever you're using, I put a little bit extra, sort of perhaps a teaspoon and a half, because they don't always rise as well, because I haven't got the gluten structure to do so. That's the only thing I would say. But yes, you can substitute them. But equally, if there's a recipe for one of the flours that you don't have, you can substitute it with a normal flour. I mean, it works both ways.
Excellent. Good. Well, if nobody has any further questions, I will call the session to a close. I mean, Ruth, your book is available where to buy?
My book is available on Amazon. It's available on the Prospect Books website. And if you're further afield, you can get it through the book depository with free shipping to anywhere in the world. I've got quite a few events coming on, which you might be interested in. I'm just going to quickly share my screen again, and then you can have a quick look. So basically, I've got quite a few events coming up. If anyone's near Enfield, the Village Whole Food Store is on Friday the 3rd of December. I'm doing a book signing with tasters from the book, which was interesting because that was where I got all my flowers and grains and things from during lockdown, and they were really, really supportive to me. And I'm going back there to sort of do a signing with the book and their products, which is great. I'm in East Grinstead in the bookshop doing a Freekeh Wild Root Grain talk and cooking demo in person on the 9th of December in the bookshop, and that's a ticketed event. I'm doing an interesting supper club in London on Monday the 13th of December in conjunction with a chap who produces hope and bowls. And hope and bowls are wonderful vessels for cooking, serving, and basically making all the recipes. So we're going to make a lot of the things, even the cakes can be made in the bowls, put in the oven, and then served. So we're doing a joint supper club on Monday the 13th of December. And then on Monday the 20th, I'm with Gilly Smith near Gleaned, and it's a supper club and hopefully a bit of a guild get together if anyone can make it. And that will be very festive recipes from the book too.
It's just another question coming from Birgitta. Is there a way we can get Ruth's events in the chats?
How can we do that?
I don't know. I think the easiest thing would probably be to email Birgitta, to email Ruth directly. Ruth, do you mind putting?
No.
I can post that in for you if you bear with me. I will just.
I'm thinking for everybody else. I mean, I'm in Copenhagen, but it would just be interesting. It's very busy times we're going in. It's definitely hard for me to keep track. But if you're doing anything online, I'd like to be able to see if I can join.
Yeah.
Ruth.
Well, I'll tell you what, Ruth, I'll tell you what might be a good idea is if you post it on the forum. Is everyone here in the forum?
What, shall I post the last slide on Facebook?
Yeah, post it on the Facebook forum, and then people will have a reference point there so they can see where the events are coming up. The ones that are in the UK, because unfortunately, obviously, I don't understand.
Super, thank you.
But when you're back in England, obviously, please do visit one of Ruth's supper clubs or something. Yeah, it's been absolutely fabulous to have you, Ruth, talk to us today about Freekeh and ancient grains. I'm really, really enjoying your book, and I'm sure those that have got a copy already are enjoying it, and those that haven't have certainly perhaps been inspired to cook more with Freekeh. I'm sorry about.
If anyone does enjoy the book and is an Amazon account holder, if they could write a review, that would be a very, very helpful.
Yes, they like reviews.
That would be lovely. Freekeh Nieman, predictive text. Thanks, Clarissa.
Yes, Clarissa. Yes, I whenever I type Freekeh in, it comes out with freaked. So
yeah,
it's yeah, predictive text indeed. It's the bane of I think everyone's life in this day and age. So yes, I think if everyone's happy, I'm going to close the meeting and kick you all out in the nicest possible way.
Can you save the chat for me?
I will save the chat,
yeah.
and I've got the recording. I know some people were having trouble hearing. Personally, it was okay at my end. It was a bit muffled, but I managed to keep up. So I'm hoping that it'll be fine when we put it online, that people that can watch it back again if they want to. But if not, I'm sure you're welcome to ask Ruth any questions. Your details will be on the Guild website, won't they?
Yeah. Yeah.
Contact
and
details.
if you do have a go, and you know, if you do have a go and post you know, and make some nice Freekeh recipes, again, post them on the forum, so to let everyone see how wonderful Freekeh can be, and post some pictures, because it always goes down very well when people see pictures of other people's food.
I will try. I will probably forget, because in the evenings I tend to forget to take pictures of my food. I'm still trying to think of what to post for Square Meal at the moment.
I haven't got there yet.
How do you show your face on? Oh, So there's a bottom at the bottom that says a button that says video, Susan.
Right.
So if you click on the video, it will have a line through it. I'm going to stop my video so you can't see me. And when you click it again, the line should disappear. You will appear on screen.
Thank you. I've just done that.
Yes,
Got
there
my
we are.
loud-
We can see you now, Susan.
Great.
Right.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.
But for future reference. Anyway, I am going to close the meeting for everyone. Thank you again, Ruth.
My
And
pleasure.
we will see you all again soon.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much, everybody. Thank you.